So, Guardian, you want to clap Crota's cheeks on day one. I have a feeling it won't be as much of a pushover as people remember. Let's start by saying the revamped raids have all had significant difficulty increases and reworked mechanics, so we should expect the same here, if not more so. I'd also like to add that I think they will add a new encounter or pad out the current ones because of the short length of the raid. Either way, you'll want to be prepared for whatever is coming your way. And let's start with weapons because you'll clearly want some ad clear in way, shape, or form because a lot of Crota's End is ad clear. Let's start with Centrifuge. It's a primary arc damage auto rifle. This is probably the closest thing you could get to the Zalo Supercell from Destiny 1. It's pretty much an arc auto rifle that chains lightning between targets, which is really good for ad clear. And the catalyst makes it to where if you're overcharged, it constantly reloads even when you're standing still, because normally you have to be sprinting to get that. I do think it's going to be a sleeper hit for maybe the intro encounter and bridge. I can't see it being much more useful outside of that, but it's definitely something I would bring in my back pocket if you plan on running Arc. Osteostriga is the next weapon I want to bring up. I would definitely bring this in general just because of how strong it is. This weapon launched with Witch Queen, and honestly, its power scaling hasn't been outdone. It's just amazing for ad clear. You get a headshot on an ad and it spreads corruption damage and poison. It can clear out entire rooms, and the kicker is when you kill things, it overflows your magazine. You can seriously have over 100 bullets in one mag with this thing, which means you can fire it forever. This is also a good weapon to pair with the necrotic grips if you're playing on Warlock and you plan to bring those. Personally, I wouldn't bring necrotic grips for a day one raid because I don't really see the utility outside of some other exotics we're going to talk about here shortly. But Osteo, for sure, I would bring it if you need an ad clear weapon and you have it. It's just super good. If somebody on your team already has it, maybe not because the poison only stacks for one of them. But besides that, yeah, it's a great weapon. I'd recommend bringing it. I want to briefly bring up Outbreak Perfected. It is a good ad clear weapon, but I think it's more so geared towards damage. This is a good backup weapon if you can't find any heavy and you need it for a damage phase. I would keep it on standby. You can use it for ad clear, but maybe not use that as your main source of ad clear. Maybe keep that in the back pocket for damage. Moving past the exotics, first legendary that I'm going to mention for ad clear and just using in general is going to be the Callus Mini Tool. This thing is phenomenal. It rolls with incandescent and unrelenting, which means that every time you get a headshot, causes scorch, causes explosions, but when you get multi-kills, you also heal yourself. This is a very sustainable SMG as a primary, has a lot of resource as a primary too, so this is definitely my personal number one pick to bring if you have it. If you have the role that I mentioned, if you have it crafted or whatever, definitely bring this gun. Our next SMG that I'm going to recommend is also legendary. It's the Ikelos from the Season of the Seraph. Specifically, the one that has Rasputin's Arsenal. If you can get it with Threat Detector Volt Shot, this is another good ad clearing weapon. So you know how incandescent, when you get headshots, it causes scorch and kills everything? Volt Shot is kind of the same thing, except when you get a headshot, it chains lightning. So this is pretty much the legendary version of the Centrifuge if you don't want to waste that exotic slot. This is another good weapon to bring. It's in the aggressive archetype and not the rapid fire like the Callus, so it does hit a little bit harder. However, I don't think it's better than the Callus. I think it's very close, pretty neck to neck, but I don't think that it's better. Now that we got some of our ad clearing options out of the way, we're going to take a look at some of the DPS weapons that you're going to want to use. We're not going to get into heavies straight away. We'll save that for the next portion of the video, but this is going to be focused on the special weapons, and there might be a primary in here. For DPS, this is what you're going to go to for big numbers of damage, reliable DPS, things like that. And starting off, to take the top slot for my number one recommended weapon for DPS is going to be a Wither Horde. Now, this weapon doesn't really do impressive numbers on its own, but this is one of those weapons where you shoot it onto the boss, it does damage over time, and you can switch to a different weapon. And with bait and switch being really popular in heavy weapons right now, just having another source of continual damage is always going to be good. I used this specifically in my last day one raid race, and we did really good. I was very impressed with how this weapon performed. I think a lot of the community feels the same way because this is a fan favorite weapon ever since it came out. Even though it's had tweaks and nerfs and everything, it always consistently remains at the top. And if you have Witherhoard, I recommend bringing it. It has kind of the same problem as Osteo, to where if you have another person on your team having it, you both can't shoot it in the same way, but there's a cheese around that. If one person shoots it directly at the boss and sticks them, but then another person shoots it at their feet, you can use 2 Witherhoards, but that's where I would max it out. Absolutely, you do not want to have more than 2 Witherhoards because it is going to be useless. Now, Cloud Strike's an interesting one because I do think this is going to be a sleeper hit in Crota's end, and I know that sounds crazy, but with the change to rapid-fire sniper rifles and just Cloud Strike's damage from the actual strike in general, I think this is going to be a really good pick. And I say that because a lot of the encounters in Crota's don't have you up close and personal with the boss. The Death Singer, Crota, the bridge, you're not really going to be up close to these enemies that you're trying to pick off and kill. So I do think Cloud Strike might come in useful, maybe more so than the legendary rapid fires or just legendary snipers in general. Maybe something like triple tap and something with a DPS perk might also be good. But the only sniper I can really recommend to you for DPS phases right now is going to be Cloud Strike. Next, we're going to talk about Deliverance. Now, this is one of my personal favorite weapons. It comes from the Vow of the Disciple raid, and it is craftable. If you get cornered in successful warm-up as a roll on this, if you are surrounded by anything, it can be small adds, boss, whatever, it is a huge damage boost. And this is one of the harder hitting fusion rifles. So if you have this, I would definitely bring it. I think this is going to be another sleeper hit weapon. I'd like to bring up the Aramite as well. I debated even adding this to the list or not because after doing some testing, I didn't know if it was going to be worth it, but once I got a couple raid runs in with it, I decided this 100% can be a contender if you don't have any heavy. This thing can run with the perk Controlled Burst, which is if you land every bolt in a fusion rifle ammo, you can get a damage boost, and it multiplies after a couple times that you hit. This does do a lot of damage on its own. The only drawback is that it is a slow charging fusion rifle, so if you are not able to get a charge time masterwork or you don't craft it, maybe don't bring this, but you can definitely use it in certain situations. If you are keen on using fusion rifles, I do recommend the rapid fire frames just because those are always consistently the best for DPS. The Riptide, I think, is another one of those guns that can be really good just because it rolls with chill clip, and where it's a rapid fire frame, you can proc it consistently, multiple times even. The Riptide is always really good in raids and dungeons when you do have it. I say it's probably even better to things like the Cartesian Coordinate. I think maybe the Null Composure gives it a small run for its money. But speaking of Null Composure, we'll go ahead and bring that up. I was going to include this on the ad clear version of the video because you can use this for ad clear and it's really good. Reservoir Burst just clears out monsoons of enemies. It's kind of insane how good this thing is at ad clear, but it also gets high impact reserves, but it's a rapid fire fusion rifle, so this is really good for DPS phases if you don't have anything else. If you are running Void, I recommend this thing immensely because you can proc all of your Void subclass elements really easy with this thing, plus clear out everything in your path. So if you are using Void, this is going to go ahead and get a guaranteed bring this from me if you have it. Now, this might be cheating when I include this, but I recommend somebody brings Divinity, especially for day one. I know nobody wants to be the div bitch, but I mean, if you have it and you have the opportunity to use it, definitely bring it. Preferably a Warlock with the Cenotaph mask, because those two exotics go together in a way that I didn't even think was possible. It borderline breaks the game in raids. So if you're a Warlock with Cenotaph, everybody's going to love you if you bring Divinity. Definitely bring it if you are a Warlock with Cenotaph. If not, and you want to consider bringing it, still bring it. You're still going to be the hero of the fire team. Everybody loves the guy who brings Div. And I do want to quickly bring up something that I did forget in the ad clear portion of the video now that I saw it in my files. The Forbearance is easily going to be the best ad clear that isn't an exotic. Forbearance also comes from Val the Disciple, and it can get Ambitious Assassin and Chain Reaction, which means if you get a kill with that wave frame, it's going to chain to everything, and then it's going to overflow 2 ammo rounds back into the magazine. So it is 100% going to be the best thing that's not an exotic for you to bring for ad clear, and I would recommend it if you have it crafted, because it is that good, and I don't think it has been topped in terms of ad clear. Moving on to the heavy weapon portion of this video, this is going to be what you should bring in your heavy slot and what you should go out of your way to reserve for the day 1 race and challenge mode. And we're going to start it off with Gjallarhorn. Now, I know this one's kind of cheating, like the Divinity thing. You might be thinking, why would I bring Gjallarhorn? The thing doesn't do damage. It sucks ass. No. Gjallarhorn, if one person has it, you're giving every legendary rocket launcher on the team Wolfpack rounds. And legendary rockets in the game right now are 100% the best DPS method and way to go at the moment. With things like Bipod and Bait and Switch, you definitely want to use rockets during this race. And if you're using Gjallarhorn, you're going to be like the Divinity guy. Everybody loves you. Everybody's going to turn to you, and we all appreciate you. And while we're on the topic of rockets, the best legendary rocket right now for constant damage is going to be the Apex Predator. Now, I personally don't have the crafted god roll or anything like that. I do have one that's sufficeable, but this rocket launcher can get bait and switch. And if you don't know bait and switch, it's pretty much if you do damage with your primary and your secondary and your heavy gets increased damage if you have it on there. Bait and switch is just a really good damage perk in general, and the Apex Predator can also get reconstruction, which means you can shoot 4 rockets at once. 4 bait and switch rockets without having to reload is huge. That's going to be a humongous burst of damage. If you have the crafted Apex, or you have one that at least has bait and switch, I definitely recommend bringing it. That is going to be your go-to DPS weapon. Now, let's say you don't have friends who are running Last Wish with you, or you've just never got around to farming it, or you just don't want to learn because it's so late in the game. You can get the Hothead from Grandmaster Nightfalls, which, you know, by the time this video comes out, it's not going to be available. But if you already have one from before, this is another really good rocket launcher. It rolls with explosive payload, or explosive light, and it also rolls with Demolitionist, which means every time you throw a grenade, you're reloading. Every time you pick up an Orb of Power, it makes one of the rockets do more damage. This is just a really consistent rocket launcher. You know, no one's going to complain if you have it. You know, if you don't have the Apex and you have the Hothead, you're completely fine. Just make sure that it's a decent roll. Now, let's say that you don't have friends to run Grandmasters and you haven't got a chance to farm for this, or maybe it just wasn't in rotation when you wanted it. You can currently go to Shaxx and focus the Blowout. It is the pretty much exact same rocket launcher as the Hothead. It rolls with the same perks, it has impact casing, same archetype. So if you need a rocket launcher, you have no way of getting the ones that I've mentioned before, take your Crucible engrams and go to Shaxx right now. Get this thing immediately. If you don't have any other options, this thing is amazing. It's pretty much the Hothead. I'm not going to pretend that they're exactly the same, because the Hothead Adept can get Adept mods and things like that, but this is the closest thing that you are going to get to the Hothead. So if you don't have one, definitely go focus one right now. The next rocket I want to bring up from the aggressive archetype is Bump in the Night. This is a stasis rocket launcher from Season of the Haunted. It is craftable. It rolls with impact casing. The thing that makes this rocket launcher really good is that it has Demolitionist Chill Clip as a roll. Chill Clip, you know, that shatter damage that you get from freezing things is huge, and with Wolfpack rounds, you're going to proc that multiple times, and when you have Demolitionist, you throw a grenade, you reload it. It's just one of those really good options. Now, Starfire did get nerfed if you're a Warlock, so it's probably not going to be as effective as, let's say, an Ashen Wake Titan, but Bump in the Night could be a sleeper hit. I wouldn't recommend it over the rocket launchers that I've mentioned before, but if you do have it, definitely bring it. Now, I wanted to save this one to talk about last, the Cold Comfort. Now, this came out with Season of the Deep, which was last season. It's exclusive to the Ghost of the Deep dungeon, and the reason I wanted to save this for last is because I farm for this thing religiously, and I have not gotten the God roll yet. I keep trying, which is Envious Assassin, Impact Casing, and Bait and Switch. this rocket launcher hits really hard and is probably the best source of burst damage in the game at the moment. This is by far the best rocket launcher besides Apex Predator that you can get. With the changes to Bipod as well, Bipod got buffed this season, and on this rocket launcher, if you can get Bipod, it might even be better than bait and switch. We've done some testing, it goes kind of back and forth, but it might be something that you are going to want to use, just because firing 2 stasis rockets, getting the freeze and the shatter damage is still huge. So if you have this, 100% bring it. I don't personally have it, so I won't be bringing it unless I get lucky within the next couple days and I do manage to grab it for myself. But definitely this thing is worth having in your arsenal. I would not shy away from this thing at all if you have it. If it's just chilling in your vault, dust it off. I want to quickly mention Thunderlord as well. This is the only machine gun on the list. I thought about including Xenophage, but honestly, I don't think Xenophage is going to make too much of a difference compared to the Thunderlord. The Thunderlord, paired with Div, is going to be absolutely amazing, especially if multiple people are running it. This is definitely something that you and your team can do. I would recommend 5 Thunderlords, 1 Divinity if you are going to go this route. If not everybody is going to commit to the Thunderlord, don't commit to it yourself. Don't even go for it. In terms of linears, you absolutely cannot go wrong with the Sleeper Simulant. When the linear fusion rifles got nerfed a few seasons ago, they didn't actually touch the exotic ones, so Sleeper still chunks amazingly hard. If your team decides they want to run linears, this could be an option for you. I'd say you could bring it if you absolutely wanted to and your team's committing to linear fusion rifles anyways. The next linear I want to talk about, I actually forgot to get a screenshot of it, but it's from the Vow of the Disciple raid. It's Cataclysmic, and it comes with bait and switch, which we've already talked about is immaculate. It's amazing. It's probably the best legendary linear you can get. It might be running a close race with Briar's Contempt, but Cataclysmic is my personal go-to choice for linear fusion rifles. So if you have it, definitely consider bringing that if your team's going to use linears. Briar's Contempt. Now this one is a little tricky because it runs with Reconstruction Frenzy, which means as long as you're surrounded by ads or whatever, you are going to get a significant damage boost. However, this thing right here is probably the best 3-round burst linear fusion rifle. This thing runs pretty neck to neck with Cataclysmic in terms of DPS, and a lot of people have used this to solo the Ghost of the Deep Dungeon and solo other content. So if you don't have Cataclysmic, I would say bring this. It's very easy to get. It comes from the Root of Nightmare raid, which is, a pushover. Anybody can really do it. And if you don't have friends or a team, just go on LFG and go for it. I mean, it's an easy enough raid to pick up. I promise you will have success if you have a semi-competent team to go for it. Next 3-round burst linear that I want to talk about is Storm Chaser. This thing has auto-loading holster and firing line. You get it from the Duality Dungeon, which coincidentally, as of me uploading this is the weekly dungeon, so you can definitely go farm for this right now. It might not be as good as Briar's Contempt, but it is pretty good. As long as you're near teammates, this thing gets a pretty good damage boost, and maybe something that you might want to run if you guys are running linears. However, I don't think it outdoes Briar's. I don't think it outdoes Cataclysmic, so do keep that in mind. If you are going to run this, you might be hitting a little less than your teammates. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is Outbreak one more time. I know earlier I mentioned that this thing could be good in DPS phases, but let me tell you right now, if you have all your team running Outbreak, if you don't have Heavy and you need to switch to this thing, this has the potential to do huge boss damage. However, it's really only good if you have multiple people running it. This is not something that you are going to want to run by yourself because the damage ramp up is not quick at all. Like, the damage ramp up on this thing does take a little bit, which is why you want multiple people, because your nanites can trigger each other. Now, before I move on to the exotic armor pieces, I didn't bring up Malfeasance just because I have a strong feeling that right now the Malfeasance is going to get disabled for day one raid. It's clearly bugged right now, and it is doing way more damage than intended with the lucky pants, which, of course, that happens at least once a season, it feels like now. But for anybody who's wanting to incorporate that into your day one build, I would recommend not doing it. It is 100% bugged. They will disable it. I'm calling it now. Now, for exotic armor pieces, I'm only going to mention a few for each class that really stick out, because with your armor, it's not as strict as you say, like your DPS weapons and things like that. So, really, there's a lot of ways you could go with this outside of the ways that I mentioned, but I am going to mention the top tier options for each class, just so you have an idea of what you can build around and what direction you should kind of go. For the Warlock, we're going to start with the Lunafaction boots. I will go ahead and say up front, I do think Solar Warlock is going to be the way to go if you are running Warlock. Now, I'm not saying you can't run other classes as Warlock or that it would be a bad idea, but if you are running Solar Warlock, you're going to have the most utility in the raid, and you're going to be the most important part of the team just because of how strong Well is currently. I hope they don't nerf it, but I know there's some people and other content creators that are really pushing for that nerf, but as it stands right now, it's definitely the best way to go. And Lunafaction max out you and your team's reload speed if they're standing in your well, and that is huge for DPS phase, especially day one. So I would 100% bring these if you're a Solar Warlock. Now, let's say your team already has decent reload speed, or they don't necessarily need the Lunafactions buff, or if you really just want to add to the overall DPS and add clear, Sun Bracers you can't go wrong with. Now, I know Starfire used to be a huge clutch for, us Warlocks, and it got kind of taken away from us, and I like to imagine the Sun Bracers are like, the Starfire Protocol Light. It does require you to get a powered melee kill, but with the snap melee you cause Scorch, and they did fix it to where the Scorch and Explosion do count towards that Sun Bracers buff. So if you're running Solar Grenades and Sun Bracers, you can contribute to as much damage as before, if not more, and your add clear potential becomes amazing with it. So if you want to go that route, I would 100% recommend it. I've talked a lot about Solar, but I do want to mention a couple Stasis exotics real quick. The Osmiancy gloves are never a bad idea on the Warlock, just because the 2 cold snaps, which means you can throw multiple Stasis turrets, or if you get stuck in a bad spot, you can always freeze. Now, I do think these might be really good for the first encounter when everyone has to take checkpoints at the lamp and stuff like that. So if you do want to bring these for the first encounter and maybe bridge, and you're running a Stasis Warlock, I don't see it hurting anything you bringing these. Another Stasis exotic that not a lot of people talk about is Balador's Wrathweavers. So the Warlock Stasis Super is just ass in PvE. It doesn't really do anything outside of a little bit of ad clear, and it's not even that much just because of the energy drain. But the kicker with this is if you're the only person running Stasis on your team and you do the detonation, so like not the freeze attack, but the attack that blows up, and you do it near your teammates, it gives them a huge damage boost as long as they're not using Stasis. So this exotic honestly is really good for an extra damage boost if you don't already have the maximum buff from Well, or stacks of surges, whatever you happen to be running. So if you are running Stasis, you don't have Osmiancy, or you just want the extra DPS for boss phases, definitely bring Balador's Wrathweavers. Not a lot of people talk about them. Definitely a sleeper hit. I've seen them in raids, and they have the potential to do crazy damage, and damage that does seem a little bit broken at times. I'm going to rapid fire through these next couples, but Rain of Fire, if you're running Solar again, if you Icarus Dash and you have a fusion rifle equipped, it reloads your weapons. That's really good for DPS phases, clearly, because it allows you to reload fast. It's kind of like a hunter dodge. And then the Cenotaph Mask, specifically if you are the div bitch of the team, you want to be running this just because it reloads your fusion rifles while you're firing it, and that does work with the tap fire of Divinity. Plus, if you hit a major enemy or mini boss with your Divinity, for example, it's going to mark the enemy, and if your teammate finishes them, it guaranteed drops heavy. Now, let's say your teammate is using the Aeons, it's going to drop ammo for you too, so this thing is going to be huge for generating reloading ammo, and I recommend at least one warlock on the team has this, preferably the person running Divinity. This thing is going to be absolutely necessary, I feel like, for some teams, because ammo economy right now is dog shit. So if you have a way to guarantee that your team is getting that heavy, you guys are already at a step above other teams. Now, for hunters, you guys don't have a lot of super good PvE options, but Star Eater scales are definitely your best. So after you collect 6 orbs, it's gonna buff your super to a point where it's just gonna do massive burst damage. So you can use the new Arc Super. Its name kind of phased my mind, so I don't know the name off the top of my head. But the new Arc Super, Golden Gun, Blade Barrage, even Silk Strider, these things are going to be super busted with Star Eater scales. Just like any super that does any sort of burst damage mixed with Star Eaters is going to be an instant million to 2 million damage. Definitely, if you're a hunter and you plan on using a DPS super outside of Tether, bring Star Eaters. You're going to do great. On the side of utility, I think Radiant Dance Machines have the potential to be really good for Crotas just because you're constantly surrounded by enemies in Crota's End, and dodging near an enemy gives you more dodges. This can be really good for DPS phase where you know that at some point you're going to be surrounded by thralls and acolytes and things because they infinitely spawn in Crotas. So let's say you're on DPS phase, you're shooting rockets. Let's say you're shooting Gallahorn, you fire your 2 galleys, you need to dodge, shoot 2 more. You can dodge again, shoot 2 more in that short amount of time. I just feel like Radiant Dance Machines are a good way to get more damage, and they are slept on very heavily in PvE. Now, I've seen some hunters use them in raids that I've done and Sherpas and things like that, and they always do really great. I do think people just sleep on this exotic because it doesn't have like an immediate huge DPS or, effect that seems very noticeable. But trust me, when you're getting that Radiant Dance Machine proc and you can dodge 20 times in a row, and that includes reloading your weapon, just reloading your weapon rapidly back to back is enough to, put out more damage and do crazy numbers. My number one pick for Hunter Exotic, though, is definitely going to be Gerfalcons. A lot of people probably saw this coming on this list, but if you're not running Void Hunter in the raid, I mean, you are already at a slight disadvantage. Tether is the best debuff in the game. Maybe if you're running Div, you don't need it, which is true. But the pure utility you get from Gerfalcons, being able to constantly have Volatile, turn invisible, cause void damage, get your grenades back, things like that. Gerfalcons is 100% the best Hunter Exotic for PvE at the moment, in my honest opinion. So if you are using a Void Hunter and you don't have this, like, what are you doing? Like, go get it now. Like, run and get this and be ready because you will want this. For Titans, I've only got a couple that I can really mention here that I think are going to be standouts. Loreley, as always, just the tank capability you have with Loreley is always going to be super great. You can't go wrong, especially if you're running Solar Titan, which I do think Solar Titan probably has the most utility at the moment just because the best buff comes from Well. You won't need the bubble, and you're guaranteed going to have a Well on your team, so I don't recommend running bubble. Thunder Crash, you're not going to want to Thunder Crash Crota because you can't do damage to him anyways without the sword. So Solar is definitely going to be the way to go in my opinion, and if you have Loreleys, you're going to survive 9 times out of 10 some really absurd things, and they can just bail you out of some really bad situations. That's pretty much a get out of jail free card if you're playing Titan. Now, I wanted to save these for last, but the gauntlets that just came out this season, the Pyrogale gauntlets, they turn your Burning Maul into a one-use thing. So, like, when you activate it, you can fire off the projectile one time, but it does massive damage, and it creates these little, like, vortex tornadoes that constantly do burn damage. In our playtesting, these things are crazy. Like, they absolutely do huge amounts of burst damage. I don't know if they're going to get disabled, which is why I saved them for last. But if they don't, I recommend going out and farming for these and bringing these. It's a good source of burst damage. You can do it from a safe distance. It travels. I say that this is probably going to be the Titan's burst damage option for this specific raid just because Thunder Crash is a no-go for Crota. I'm gonna mention that one more time. Just don't bring Thunder Crash if you're a Titan. It is not going to be good for Crota. It might be good for the Death Singers, and then you could run Curious the Falling Star, but don't bring it for Crota because you're going to be wasting your exotic slot, and you won't be benefiting your team in any way whatsoever. Now, I'm going to end the video with this. I'm going to leave my build up on screen right here. This is my personal build that I'm going to be taking into the day one raid. I am running Sun Bracers on my Solar Warlock because me and my team have already communicated that we have someone with Luna factions. We have somebody with the Boots of the Assembler. We don't really need any more utility outside that, so I'm going to help with ad clear. I am running Sun Bracers for the extra ad clear and damage. I have my momentum transfers. I have my bombers, my distribution, everything like that we are going to personally need. This is a pretty good build for Warlock if you need a go-to build and you are planning on running Sun Bracers. Outside of that, the only advice I can really give you for day one races, I have done 4 day one races at this point. I've only cleared one, which is Root of Nightmares, for full disclosure, which was like a pushover. But I've always done it as LFG. This is the first time where I have an actual team ready to go in. And we have done a lot of extensive planning. We've been doing charts, testing, everything. I have a really good feeling we're going to beat this one in 24 hours. But the best advice I can give you is be patient with each other. This is not going to be easy or as easy as everyone's going to make it out. I'm sure that, there's going to be big content creators who are like, oh, this is the easiest shit in the world. If you can't do this, you're fucking stupid. Like all this other stuff. Don't listen to that. If you happen to clear this with your team, you should feel accomplished 100% because you did something that a lot of the community can't do. Even if a huge chunk of people end up able to beat Crotas and you still do it, just be proud of yourself. Try not to be so hard on each other. You're going to get frustrated. Even if you're going in there with your best friends, you're going to hate each other by the time you come out of it. That's just how things work. Just persist and try to work through it. And if you can't clear it, no big deal. It's okay. That's the fun of these day one attempts, is to just try to go for it. Try not to go in with the mindset of we're going to absolutely destroy this thing, because that's not healthy. Just have cautious optimism about the path going forward, because you might not beat it, and that's okay. It doesn't make you any less of a player if you're, not able to beat it. But the community as a whole, I might be over speaking like my role in the community, but we appreciate that everybody at least gave it a try. And especially if you planned and went in there, just be proud that you're even trying, because a lot of people are, intimidated. They're not going to go in just because they're afraid of failing. But that's really all I can say, is that, just be patient, be considerate, don't break up your team over small arguments. You're going to argue. When you get into these heated arguments, work past them. Don't branch off and leave your team in a bad spot and abandon each other just because something goes wrong, because things do go wrong. Everybody's learning. It's like, just because you mess up a bunch on one team, you're just going to go to a different team and mess up a bunch there. It's better just to stick with the people that you have planned to do this with and work your way through it, because you don't know that the next team that you're joining is going to be better. And then you're going to be joining 40 LFG groups, and then you don't know if you're going to beat it at all. And then, what makes it even worse is that your team might beat it without you. Just try to level head through everything, have the expectations that you might not beat this, and that's okay. But with the weapons and the armor and everything that I'm telling you here, you have a decent shot. In terms of survivability, that really goes to your own personal skill level, but I believe in you guys if you're going to attempt it and try it, and don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it. But I'll see you in the next one, guys.